What is going on, constant viewers and listeners of the multiverse? Welcome back to Geek Talk with Brian Third 16. If you're new to this channel or perhaps this podcast, welcome. I'm glad you decide to either view or listen. And please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast for all the updates and for more content. Actually, speaking of updates, I'm going to give you some right now, actually. I'm planning on producing more comic book reviews and show reviews in the future. I'm starting to get the hang of this podcasting thing. I mean, I've said this probably in the past, I would produce more content though, but I haven't gotten around to do it because of being so busy though. But now that I'm starting to get the groove of like how my podcast episodes work and what works and what doesn't work, I'm going to start producing more content, more comic book reviews, like I said. And I'm also planning on interviewing some cosplayers in the future, some other creators, and perhaps some fans of like different genres like anime, horror, science fiction. And if you're actually viewing the podcast right now on YouTube, you can actually see in the back that I'm a fan of pretty much a whole lot of stuff. You see my Boba Fett helmet in the back over there. So yeah, like that's what I'm planning on doing more stuff with the podcast. I'm also even planning on doing more skits with my cosplaying too, because I started getting into cosplay recently, and I'm doing a lot of cosplay skits. And if you go onto my Instagram, Brian from Earth 16, you will see that I did a Thanksgiving skit with all my cosplays, where I'm Mr. Knight, I'm Zenitsu Agusama, I'm also Clark Kent, who's actually presenting the whole Thanksgiving dinner. He's invited almost like all my cosplay characters. I'm also Boba Fett and King Ezekiel from Walking Dead and Negan from Walking Dead. So it's really funny. Just give it a watch. And I'm also going to post it on YouTube as well. So I'm planning on doing more of those just to show you like what I do, like a different side of what I do. In addition to doing podcasts and writing articles for the Daily Planet and Dork Side of the Force. So there's that. And on December 17th, I'm going to be in Glendale at the Gambate outdoor anime event in Arizona. So come by and see me. I'm also going to be doing a live stream of that whole event. So you'll be seeing me doing different activities, hopefully interacting with other people or other cosplayers or other anime fans like myself and all that good stuff. So I'm just going to pretty much start expanding the palette of the podcast, and of course I'll still be interviewing comic book creators. So I'm also going to be interviewing other creators and, like I said, other fans too as well. And speaking of other creators and fans, I'm actually interviewing a creator and a diehard anime fan. He's a fan of the legendary anime of Lupin the Third. And for those of you who don't know, Lupin the Third is about a thief he's sort of a great character. He's a really interesting character, and he has a partner, or several partners of his that take part in his little adventures. And he's always on the run, but then I wouldn't say he's morally ambiguous still, but I guess it's the best way you can kind of describe him. I haven't watched Lupin the Third as much though, but this was the anime that inspired. It was pretty much the anime that inspired other animes like Cowboy Bebop and among others. And the creator name is Chris Dell'lsola, if I pronounced his name correctly. I kind of forgot, but we had a really great conversation. It was a really great chat, and he's doing an unofficial guide, if you will, of Lupin the Third. And it talks about a whole lot about like the characters, how it was created. Like it just goes down to the nitty gritty. And he's planning on releasing the book as around next year, and it's going to be released in bookstores like Barnes and Noble. Of course, it most likely be released on Amazon. So it's going to be a really interesting. It's going to be a really interesting read, and I'm looking forward to actually getting my copy. And we talked a whole lot about the Lupin the Third and the anime and how it inspired in other animes, and just how awesome it was and why it's so legendary. So yeah, in this episode, without further ado, here's Chris Dell'lsola, where we talk about his unofficial guide of Lupin the Third. So grab your popcorn, sit back, relax, and enjoy my chat with Chris Dell'lsola on his book, The Unofficial Guide to Lupin the Third. Welcome to Geek Talk with Brian Furt 16, where we talk all things geek, including cosplays, video games, and comic books. I'm here in this episode today. I'm here to speak to Chris. Let's see, how do you pronounce your last name?
We pronounce it Dell'lsola. It's Italian.
Dell'lsola. Well, thank you so much. So we're here with Chris Dell'lsola to talk about his project on Lupin the Third, and it looks like it's an official guidebook for Lupin the Third,
Hmm.
which
Well,
is a
about as official as you can get when it's unauthorized.
awesome. Well, I mean, it looks really awesome. Well, first of all, thank you for being on.
Oh, my pleasure.
So, how you been? First of all.
Uh, well, busy as always, working nonstop on the book, which you can see one of the flyers back there actually, for it. But yeah, it's been good. It's been productive. And before, because I feel like people are going to ask, like, well, when's it coming out? I don't know. I just know sometime early next year, spring, summer, around that ballpark. That's the most I can say, really.
Okay. Well, yeah, sometimes, some projects, do take time, and sometimes,
Oh yeah.
especially in the creative world, I mean, it's not always like, how can I say this? It's not always set in stone. Sometimes stuff comes
Hmm.
up, or there's several factors.
The only advice I would give is don't set a deadline because you'll never meet it. The more something, like a project like this, because Lupin the Third is a series that's it's still going, and it's been an anime franchise for little over 50 years now. So
Mm-hmm.
not only is that a lot of ground to cover, but when you're yeah, when you enter in the factors of things like, well, you're a writer, you're a passionate fan of the property, you're not always just going to be satisfied with, well, that's everything, isn't it? No, probably not. I'm sure there's more in there that needs to be uncovered, that needs to be talked about. So that ends up halting a few things where I'll write a chapter and be like, all right, that's it, because that's all I can find. And then there's just that itch in the back of your head of, well, what if there's more that could be included?
Well, speaking of what's in that whole, this whole project, what are the examples of the chapters that you've written about? Like, can you give us an idea of like what's being covered in this guide?
Pretty much everything. Because like I said, it's a franchise that's 50 plus years old. So
Mm-hmm.
there's roughly, I mean, we have two new ones coming out. We have a new one coming out this December, which is like a prequel series,
Oh
and
wow.
sometime early next year, there's going to be a crossover with the cat burglar anime Cat's Eye. So
Mm-hmm.
they're still making things even as I'm writing it. So I obviously can't include absolutely everything, but it's everything like that is been released up to that point, and that's at right now that's about 58 different things. There's side stuff that is either not animated or not technically officially part of it. Like I do cover for like hardcore fans. There was this anime variety show called Mankatsu, which was adaptations of Monkey Punch or Kato-san. That was the original
Mm-hmm.
comics creator of Lupin. They're adaptations of all his other work, but because Lupin is the household name and like the big draw, they were like, well, we can't do this without some Lupin in there. So in between
Right.
segments, they have these little shorts of the Lupin gang. So it's like, well, since they're in it, I'm never gonna hear the end of, hey, how come you didn't put that in the book? They're in it. It's like, yeah, but they only make up like I counted, they only make up about 4% of the whole show. But
Right.
I guess I have to cover it because like, well, it's kind of like partially related, and it'd be easier to just put it in there than to just omit it and then never hearing the end of why didn't you include it. And then there's all this live action stuff, like they did two live action movies way back when. They did a live action, I guess you could call it a mini series for the Inspector Zenigata character, and all that
Right.
stuff. With the exception of I guess maybe the first live action film, they're not really available in the States, which was another hurdle of getting a hold of things that are not available here, or at least not
Yeah.
yet. So been a lot of importing, getting in there, watching them, and you know, dissecting them. So really, the long and the short of it is the book just covers every entry. So it starts from the pilot film from '69 to, well, I guess right now it's probably going to have to cover the prequel series Lupin Zero, which comes out this following month. So it's just reviews of each one, out of star rating. So like out of 4 stars. So This one gets 4 stars, this one gets 3 stars, that sort of thing. To basically, the idea was to make a book in the same vein as like Leonard Maltin's movie guide, where it's like, here's everything. Here's my assessment of what are the best ones in the series, which ones I think you must see, which ones are like, you could skip that one. Because when you try to introduce the series to people, the first thing that's you know sort of an obstacle is like, that's a lot of content. It's like, yeah. I mean, it's not One Piece levels of a lot of content, but it, from outsider looking in, that's a lot of stuff. And it's like, well, where do you start? Well, technically, you can start anywhere, but it just feels more concise to have a chronological guide of here's everything, here's the significance of everything, what they represent, whether or not they're good, if they're the best in their field, their best Lupin, or if it's just dumb fun entertainment. And I try to be as fair as possible because I think there's only a small handful that I would genuinely think are just outright bad.
Right. And so, like, in terms of like, what would you? I don't know much about Lupin the Third, but I feel like it's a lot like most anime that I've seen, and that little did I know have like extensive, like extensive continuities or like prequels about them. Like one of the anime that comes to mind is Rurouni Kenshin, Samurai X, and I had no idea that. I think they might have made a prequel series to all of that, and they made some movies about him too. And I was like, wow, like there's more to this guy, and there's more to the story. And then it's funny too, because even with Dragon Ball too is another example with how they have like a crap load of sagas on Dragon Ball, like from the time Goku's a kid to when he's a teenager, when he becomes a full adult, and then of course you have the very popular Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Super. Dragon Ball GT, I mean, I wasn't really a big fan of Dragon Ball GT.
Most people weren't.
Yeah. Just with the way it was, but Super is actually pretty good. And, yeah, it's just, for me, like, I think, it's just, there's so much extensive continuities with these anime that I don't know about. So with Lupin, and I know I know you have a lot to cover though. I mean, what'd you say would be the most important things to cover? Like, concept art, or like the bio on the creator, or how he came up with Lupin?
Well, at least in my book, because a book by a wouldn't say a mutual, but someone who I greatly respect, which is Reed Nelson. He's a sort of Lupin historian. So I guess you could say self-proclaimed. I don't want to say things on his behalf, but he worked closely with Discotech, the company that releases most of the Lupin here in the States, and he's done a lot of liner notes for those. He's done commentary tracks for that. He just put out what is essentially an art book with the cooperation of TMS, the company that produces Lupin in Japan, and that has concept art, that has bios of characters, and, that sort of thing. So it definitely serves that purpose. Whereas mine, it's really more to just be, I guess you could call it's a film history or a reference guide, because it's more like, it's apples and oranges here, because Reed's book and my book are going for very different things. But in Reed's book, as someone who got it recently and read it, when it comes to like the behind the scenes and the history stuff, it's a bit light, because the focus is more on, here's these characters, here's every entry, but that's mostly about it. Like their synopsi, or whatever the plural is.
Yeah.
For every episode of every series, for every movie they did, for every TV special they did. But it only covers the animated stuff, because it's called 50 Animated Years of Lupin. So it omits things like the live action films, the live action shows, the Takarazuka musical with the all-female cast. All of these are things I cover that he did not, which again, makes sense, because that wasn't the aim of his book. So I would say the point with my book is merely to just look under the look behind the curtain sort of thing of here's some behind the scenes stuff, here's some anecdotes from people who worked on it, and obviously there's interviews in the book from people of both sides of the globe. We have American actors and writers, but we also have Japanese writers, and right now we're trying to get one of the Japanese actors, so fingers crossed on that one. But That's basically the long and short of it is that, you know, the book's aim is merely to just here's everything. Here's an assessment of the quality, in my opinion, of, you know, any kind of useful information of like, you know, here's what happened during the production, or you know, stuff like that. So there's, you know, an introduction in the book that basically gives you a condensed, like, here's the general story, here are the characters, here's what they do and what they mean, and let's move on from that and get into, you know, the films and shows themselves.
I really, the interesting thing about Lupin the Third for me, man, is like, the animation. It's kind of like,
Hmm.
it's kind of. I mean, obviously it's animated. It's an animated work, but it's just kind
Yep.
of like, it's very kiddie, but then it's also serious too. It
Hmm.
like with comics too, especially. They're like the comic Persepolis is one thing that comes to my mind. It's like, even though it's kind of the way it's drawn, it's kind of like childish, but then it's like really serious too at the same time. And I feel
Right.
like it's like that with Lupin, where there's a skinny dude, just the way he moves, is just really ridiculous. But then you can tell he's like actually a badass, and like how he just
Yeah.
like shoots at people sometimes. Like he has to fight his way out of. I saw several clips of Lupin the Third where he's got to fight his way out of certain situations with his partner, and there's always this cop chasing them. I mean,
Yep.
are they like bounty hunters or something? Or are they like, con
Well,
men
they're
or
thieves. Like
thieves?
the abridged version is that Lupin is a master thief. He hence the, you know, third suffix. He's the third generation of master phantom thieves, whatever you want to call them. Arsène Lupin, who was a French thief of literature, which Monkey Punch, or Kato-san, which I prefer to call him, but Kato-san was a big fan of, because in Japan, European literature is like really highly regarded. So
Hmm.
Arsène Lupin was a favorite of his, and he basically made the character the descendant of that. So hence why he's Lupin the Third. So he's the grandson. His partners are Daisuke Jigen, who is a sharpshooter modeled after James Coburn. There's the samurai Goemon Ishikawa the 13th, who is
Samurai,
the
yeah.
descendant of the original Goemon Ishikawa of Legend. And there's his on and off fling, which is Fujiko Mine, who's sort of like the Bond girl of sorts, and the
The femme
cop who
fatale.
chases them. Yeah, the femme fatale, you know, 'cause she's a bit of a thief herself, tends to backstab Lupin, and all four of them are pursued by Inspector Zenigata, who is the police officer for the ICPO. And his goal, he's basically the Tom to Lupin's Jerry, is that, you know,
Yeah.
Zenigata will always try and catch him, but Lupin will always find a way to get away. And that
Yeah.
sort of right there, that's the show. Like, that's rinse repeat. You know, they change the setting, they change the heist, they change the MacGuffin every time. So they're pulling a heist in San Francisco, or they're hunting for some supernatural element that might, you know, control time. Like, there's with Lupin, it's always best when you're going into it to just not expect, you know, anything, because you are going to get some cartoon antics of like, the hell is this?
Yeah.
It's Lupin the Third. You just kind of accept it at that point. And really, it's good you make the point of, you know, it's like a comic, because I mean, obviously, that, you know, a lot of that has to do with the fact that it was a manga, but it was because Kato-san was heavily inspired by the likes of Mad Magazine. You know, when you look at the original drawings of the manga, you can absolutely see the inspiration. But it was very much unlike any manga of its time, which was really emphasizing, you know, a lot of the comedy, but also the fact that the way it looked like no other manga at the time. You know, it was very sketchy looking.
Exactly.
It was very crude, but that was part of its charm. You know, it was incredibly crass. Like, Lupin in the manga is the furthest thing from a likable protagonist that you could get. He lightens up over time, but those original entries, oof, not very kosher today
Kind of
would
like
be the word.
Superman too, like how he was
Mm,
originally created. I mean, Superman would just like clock the crap out of anybody, and
hmm.
like and especially in his early comics, like the very first Action Comics, one, he was just like, beating up people, who did bad, and like, or yeah, he was just like, he was not one to mess with.
Mm-hmm.
And but then like,
I wouldn't want to mess with
I wouldn't want to
Superman.
mess with him either, exactly. And then a couple years later, obviously, he lightened up to the hero that he is today. But
Mm-hmm.
it was just like, that was just one dude he didn't want to mess with. And even with the mask, like, I remember someone from another podcast brought up the mask, and I didn't know about this about the mask, where the mask from the comics is very different from Jim Carrey's mask, where he's more,
Oh yeah.
the mask from the comics is just, he's more crude, he's more brutal and kind of like sadistic at times. So whereas Jim Carrey's mask is like a goofball, and like the kids love him, obviously though. But the mask in the comics was just like
I honestly think the mask is the most applicable example when it comes to Lupin the Third, of because Lupin in the
yeah,
comics is for lack of a better word, he's just an absolute bastard. Like he's a twisted, crooked, sadistic motherfucker. But
yeah,
in the later it part of that, not really to be a pointing the finger and blaming, but a lot of that softening came about because of the legend Hayao Miyazaki, who did some entries for the earliest adaptation, which is now tentatively called Part One, although it was just called Lupin the Third when it came out in '71. But he was brought in along with Isao Takahata. Those two, of course, would go on to make Studio Ghibli or Ghibli. And they were brought in to sort of soften the show because Masaki Osumi, who was the director of Part One, wanted to do the manga proper. He wanted it to be a dark adult show. And back then,
hmm,
that was kind of unheard of for prime time of an anime with an adult audience in mind. So that was kind of revolutionary, but it wasn't doing well in the ratings. So TMS, or whatever the company was handling at the time, was like, we need to make this a little softer because I think we're losing our viewership because of how hardcore the show is. So
yeah.
Osumi-san wouldn't bow down to their demands, so he left, and Miyazaki and Takahata came in. They changed the whole character's feel. They gave him like a moral compass and
It's kind of making him a
everything.
little lighthearted, yeah.
Exactly. My friend and illustrator Lauren, who's illustrating the book, she makes the comparisons of that the Miyazaki Lupin is what she calls watercolor Lupin, which I think is the best way to sort of differentiate the stuff. Because when they do Lupin nowadays, they kind of try and do a hybrid of, they want to have the crookedness, but they also want to have the soft protagonist aspect of Miyazaki, and try to merge them, and it works sometimes, but you can only do so much because you obviously have, with Japanese standards and practices compared to American standards and practices, some stuff that's probably like, oh, that's so charming in Japan. Over here, it's like, eh. A little, collar tugging. But it was Miyazaki who really wanted to make him this. They sort of just stripped away all of the stuff that made him Lupin, but yet still made him a compelling character in those adaptations. So the Miyazaki stuff's always been mixed for me because Castle Cagliostro is a master work for, a film and animation. But as a Lupin adaptation, it's like, it's not quite like if you showed someone this movie and then you showed them everything else, it's gonna be like, what the hell is this? Like, what happened?
Yeah.
Now he's like very grabby and touchy and basically almost molesting people. Like, yeah, it's not that. Miyazaki toned all of that down, to make him more likable. But in every other stuff, like, gloves are off, so to speak, of just they make him, he's not as aggressive as the manga, but there's still traces of the, you know, uh,
Yeah, the
the
crudeness.
sex pest, I guess, would be the way to look at it.
I mean, kind of, I feel like they kind of had to find a way to kind of like hint at how he is, or they kind of push the envelope a
Mhm.
little bit just to do that. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, I mean the ones that definitely pushed the hardest, besides part one, which was again revolutionary for its time. It would be the Takeshi Koike stuff. For those maybe not in the know, Takeshi Koike is an animation, Japanese animation director, probably most well known for Red Line, the animated racing film,
hmm,
and he's done a few Lupin things. He was the lead character designer for the Woman Called Fujiko Mine show, and then he directed these spin-off films, which are sort of kind, you're a comic book fan, so you definitely understand the whole like it's sort of within a universe that's separate from this one sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's tentatively called by fans the Quake verse, because they're very much their own continuity, but they are extremely dark and kind of light on comedy. Like there's comedy in them, but the emphasis is not on the laughs. The emphasis is on the characters and the dark stories they want to tell. And they are brutal. Like by the name itself, Goemon's Blood Spray is probably the best one in that series. It's the sort of the Empire Strikes Back of the series, and it is gruesome. Like I for an animated film, I have never seen the amount of detailed carnage that I saw in that one. Like I even wrote in the book is like its fight scenes are on the same level of something like Old Boy. It's just completely brutal what they do in that movie. So there are some that really do want to push what the manga was doing with its violence, with its graphic content, but usually to save face they shy away slightly from that. Violence is very minimal or almost cartoonish sometimes. They very rarely have anything that's like objectionable, I guess you could say. But I mean, anyone getting shot in the head or attempting to grope a woman, I'd argue is objectionable in principle, but when it comes to Lupin, that's just par for the course.
I mean, kind of represents the character in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I feel like, I think I read somewhere where, several other anime was inspired by Lupin. Like, Cowboy Bebop, I think, was inspired.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say.
Shinichiro Watanabe, who was the director of Cowboy Bebop, he outright said in an interview for I think it's called New Type was the magazine, it's a Japanese magazine.
Mm-hmm.
He outright stated that Masaki Osumi, who directed portions of Part 1, his directing style was his approach when directing Cowboy Bebop. So there's a lot, and when you watch the Osumi episodes of Part 1 as a Cowboy Bebop fan, and in fact, it's because of Bebop that I sort of became interested in Lupin, because I read the same thing of, oh, there's an anime that inspired Cowboy Bebop. I kind of want to see that, but back then it was kind of hard to come by because very few things were even released in America. But yeah, when you watch them, you can absolutely see the parallels of stuff like that. And I tend to say to people, Lupin the Third is your favorite anime's favorite anime. It's sort of like
I like that.
Yeah, it's sort of like the John Carter of anime, where it's inspired so many things, yet nowadays very few people know about the source of all your favorite things. Like, you can turn on almost any anime, and if the character is doing, a running from, a 3/4 angle, you absolutely can guarantee that's a nod to Lupin, because it's one of the most iconic shots in the entire series.
Yeah.
Like it's been referenced to things like Ginrei. I even Redline referenced it, confirming Koike is a fan. God, I know there's like, what was it? Not Galaxy Express 999. What's the Galaxy Star? What am I thinking of?
I think, is it Outlaw Star?
Yes, Outlaw Star. I think it's Outlaw Star I'm thinking of. I know there's an anime. God, I have like on my hard drive, I have like a PowerPoint presentation where I was talking about this very topic, and I was using examples, because that shot alone has been referenced many times. So, yeah, Lupin it's that thing of it's highly inspirational, but mostly within its borders. Like the closest to American inspiration. Sadly, most of it is, I say sadly, but Castle Cagliostro is highly inspirational. Like the director Gary Trousdale, who people might know, he did Atlantis: The Lost Empire for Disney and a bunch of other like classic Disney Renaissance films. He outright states in a commentary track that a scene in Atlantis is ripped straight from Castle Cagliostro. Even people on The Simpsons have mentioned like, oh, this scene we lifted it from Castle Cagliostro. So because of the Miyazaki affiliation, that's a highly inspirational piece. And as many, including myself, have said, the sad thing about Castle Cagliostro is It's the most well-known Lupin media, but it's the least well-known Hayao Miyazaki film. So it's got that problem of some kind of know it. It's got that same stigma of it's a director's first film, so not everyone knows it. But
Wow.
because it's Miyazaki's first film, people will discover it, but also not realize, well, this is part of a series. Like
Uh-huh.
it's not a one-off thing. It's a self-contained picture, but it's like, that little title up there that says Lupin the Third. This is part of a series. You're watching a film adaptation of a series. And because I know, like, people like John Lasseter, the former head of Pixar Animation, has said that Castle Cagliostro is one of his favorite movies. So it has influence. There's rumor mills out there of other people who are evidently inspired by Lupin here in the States. The only one I can concretely say is true is like the new DreamWorks film The Bad Guys. The
Mm-hmm.
people behind the scenes have outright said that they took Lupin in as inspiration. More specifically, the 3D film they did, Lupin the First. They took that in as inspiration for The Bad Guys. So that's
Wow.
probably the most mainstream recent example of an American produced production that used Lupin as a basis. Lupin and European comics, like Tintin and Asterix and Obelix, stuff like that.
An Astro Boy.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Wow. So, I was wondering too, like, what got you into wanting to do this guide?
I mean, I was anticipating that, so I guess buckle in. Basically, I've been a Lupin fan for years, and I think like any fandom, I think everyone has that. They get into it, then there's sort of a dry spell, either because there's just not a whole lot happening, or something happens and you're whisked away to something else. I became a Lupin fan, and I'd say around 2010, 2011, because a friend of mine had sort of introduced it to me because uh, he had talked about this thing, and I was like, what is Lupin the Third? At first, I was getting it confused with Ranma One Half because just like the naming convention of
Yeah.
you know name and then numeral is like, is it like Ranma One Half? Like what? Why is it Lupin the Third? I don't understand. And he'd explain to me, it's like, oh, it's this like long running series. It's got a few movies. There's not a whole lot out there, like within our borders, but check it out. It's really good. And so I had found it. I had discovered the Adult Swim dub of Part Two, which is kind of now lives in
Oh
sort
man,
of
Adult Swim. I remember those days.
yeah. Well, that dub kind of lives in sort of meme infamy nowadays. Like there's all these uploads now of like like compilations of like funny moments because people are in utter disbelief that that was a real dub, and it was. I know all the behind the scenes of that now. But then 2019, 2018 rolls around, and the first trailer drops for the first, which of course I'm like jaw dropped, like, oh my God, this looks fantastic. And I was talking to a friend in Discord who was also expressing like, yeah, it looks so good. I'm like, wait, you know what Lupin the Third is? And then we started just like, talking about how much we love Lupin. And of course, all our other friends are like, well, what's Lupin? Oh, Lupin. And we start talking about it, and they're like, that sounds interesting. I want to watch it. And then it was at that point where I went, I don't have a lot of Lupin because I'm a collector of physical media. I don't have a lot of Lupin, if at all. I need to change that because then it became an inspiration to I got to get all these things so that I can watch them, with these friends of mine who are now interested, so I can share this character that I really love with them. So I spent like a good 3 months just buying every single thing that was available, stuff that was even out of print. Uh, so we did that, and sharing it with them was great. So it was from there, because then the pandemic rolls around and we're stuck inside, and all we have to do is watch things like Lupin, talk about Lupin, and then I see on Twitter that people are discovering it, going on about how great the first looks and stuff like that. And it
Yeah.
was being trapped inside, seeing Lupin getting rediscovered on social media, and sharing it with people who were friends of mine. Them getting into it. That I thought there needs to be a guide of some sorts to sort of introduce this character to people. So that got the gears rolling of, well, no one's done it, why don't I do it? Like, I know
Hey.
enough about this series, and I could do a little research. I already do too much Googling, and then it just ballooned from there because I wrote, a concept. I didn't have a publisher or anything. Like I was just sort of, shooting in the dark. And it was due to a book I had bought at the time called The Canon Movie Guide, which is a great book by Austin Trunick. Those who like uh, trash films and B movies definitely read that book. But
Evil
that was
Dead
sort of the
Man.
yeah, stuff like that. Yeah, they were famous for they did Superman 4. Canon Films did Superman 4, which some of us we don't talk about. But
Right.
it was because of that book. I was reading it. I thought this is I want to write something like this. It's a comprehensive guide. It's got interviews. It was a great read. And I, flip on the back and I noticed the publisher, Bear Banner Media. I went, wait, I know this publisher. I have like several books by these people. It's an odd, like it's not like Random House or Simon and Schuster. It's like it's not a known name. So I go and look them up, and I find out that they take book submissions. Like there's an open submission form, and I went, okay, this is a long shot, but what if I pitch the book to these people? Like I know they
Hmm.
predominantly focus on film and television. A lot of it like retro stuff from the 50s to the 70s, but what I'm pitching started in the 70s, so it's different. They don't have a lot of books on animation, let alone Japanese animation. So I wrote one chapter. The first chapter, of course, was Castle Cagliostro, because like it's the most it's the most you can talk about. A lot of people do know it, and it's probably the best like selling point when you're pitching a project like this. So I spent a few days writing that chapter. I submitted it to the publisher, explaining my idea. Like I said, this is an example chapter. Like I'll be writing more like this, and I get an email back from the guy saying, "Oh, I love this. Let's do it." And I'm like, "All
Nice.
right, I guess I just I guess I just got a book deal." So that's basically as best as I could TLDR. That was the development process of the book. So from early, I guess you could say, inception to its eventual getting picked up and me fully working on it practically nonstop since then.
All right. That's awesome, man. I mean, like, and you said it's gonna come out like sometime next year.
Sometime next year, I would say ballpark spring, summer. So my
Mm-hmm.
manuscript is due in May. I can most definitely have it turned in before May. That would be my idea. But obviously, it's up to my publisher as to how long it takes from manuscript delivery to, you know, production of printed copies, sort of thing. So stuff like that is not up to me. And the other thing that people constantly ask is, well, how much is it going to cost? I don't know. That's as far as I know. That's not up to me. That's up to the publisher. How they deem. All right, we get this split, and you get that split, and this covers the cost because it's you know this big a book. The bigger the book, the more it's going to cost, obviously, because that's a lot of trees that need to be cut down.
Exactly. Speaking of which, is there gonna be like a digital copy version or anything like that, or like
There
a?
is. There is going to be an ebook, a paperback, and a hardcover. As far as I know, all of them at the same time. The only thing that is not on the horizon right now is an audiobook. A lot of people do ask about audiobooks. I'm not against doing one, but that's almost a second book, really, because you're basically asking me to read hundreds of pages, thousands of
Yeah.
words, and we have to do that in several sessions. There have been people who have expressed interest in participating, like one of the Lupin actors, Dan Warren, who does audiobook reading for a living, has said, hey, if you need anyone to read the book, I'd be happy to do it. So, there's obviously interest, but it's all about, you know, because I would have to pay for it myself. The publisher does not fund those kinds of projects because they're an independent publisher. Their whole thing is that you just submit the manuscript and they do everything else. They do the pressing, the printing, and the distribution to outlets. So the compromise is obviously that you don't get paid to do it, and you're going to get paid when the book is in people's hands and people are buying it. So the production of an audiobook would depend solely on how well the book sells as it is. So if it does well enough, then we'll look into it. If it does okay, then it would still happen, but it would be a long, long time because that would be an exhaustive process to do.
Nice. So, I mean, right now we're kind of running out of little time though. So,
Mhm.
do you have like any social media handles that we can follow?
Certainly, yes. I would say the one you should go to is Twitter. I know there's a lot of doom and gloom with Twitter, but that's where I am. That's what I tend to use the most. So on Twitter, it's at aficionado Chris. So AFICIONADO, and then Chris CHRIS. You can follow that. I post a lot of updates on the book, progress reports, stuff like that. And obviously, you can join the mailing list to get updates for, when the book is ready to ship out, if I'm doing book signings in your area. And for that, you can just go to tinyurl.com/the Master Thief files, and it'll give you an auto email that you just send that, you end up on the mailing list, and you get cataloged for stuff like that. Otherwise, I'm kind of on Instagram, so there it's aficionados, Chris. So same as Twitter, just add an S after aficionado, because Twitter wouldn't allow the full name. I could only take out one letter, and I'd rather be aficionado Chris than aficionados cry. So that was my reasoning for that. And
Clever, man.
I have a website. You go to aficionadoschris.com, and from there you can basically find all my socials and things, like my YouTube and my Twitter and stuff like that. So I would say go there first, and pick your poison, I guess.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been great. I'm looking forward to getting this book, especially when it comes out sometime next year. Would it be like on a Kickstarter or anything like that, or?
Nope. It'll be straight to distribution. Like,
nice.
As soon as that manuscript is in and Bear Manor Media have it, they're going to be printing copies. They're going to be available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. That much I can say.
That is awesome, man. I'm looking forward to getting it. I'll be sure to subscribe to your email and all that, so that way I can keep on the lookout and just purchase the book. And maybe I'm going to watch some Lupin the Third, too, since I'm watching a lot of Ronin Kenshin right now.
Best thing I could say, if you want to watch Lupin the Third, you have plenty of places to watch them, including free. You can go to Pluto TV or Tubi. There's a lot of Lupin the Third that's available on those for any of you guys listening and or watching. If you're curious, go to those places. Just look up Lupin the Third. You'll find plenty to watch.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for watching and listening. This is Brian from Earth 16, and this is
Aficionados Chris or Chris Dell'lsola.
signing out. Thank you so much, y'all. You have a good one.